So according to the most recent crime statistics that were released yesterday, 10,818 people reported rape cases, an increase of 1,300 incidents over the same period last year. 4,653 of these are alleged to have occurred at the rape victim or rapist's residence. The Eastern Cape is one of South Africa's most dangerous provinces in which to live, with over 1,838 rapes reported in the first 3 months of 2022. Lusikisiki, again, with the highest rate of rape and sexual assault cases. The biggest organization working on gender-based violence in the Eastern Cape is Masimanyane Women's Rights International. We're joined by the Executive Director, Dr. Lesley Ann Foster, to help us make sense of the dynamics on the ground that lead to these increases in reports of rape and sexual assault. Ma'am, thank you so much for availing yourself this morning. What do we need to understand about the situation of sexual assault and rape in the Eastern Cape?
Well, the numbers are horrific to start off with, especially because there's been double-digit increases. So we're very, very concerned about that. But I think the biggest issue, and I've been saying this often, is we're not working enough on prevention. I know the minister has said that the policing have to up their game, but by the time they do that, we are dealing with victims. What we need to be looking at is how to prevent the violence from happening. And prevention is a multi-pronged approach. In areas like Lusikisiki, you have extremely high levels of poverty, high levels of unemployment, high levels of deprivation. And we don't look at these as actual drivers of violence against women, but they are. And when we go in and we make interventions, at the moment we have, intense programs in Lusikisiki working with communities, looking at human rights issues, looking at issues of safety and so forth. But it is not enough. The state has a responsibility to actually address the drivers, the economic drivers, the social and cultural drivers as well. And that's the real problem in these areas why we continue to see these high levels. There's a correlation between poverty, inequality, deprivation and marginalization and violence. And that's what we are not effectively addressing.
Ma'am, from the work that you do, when you speak to some of the women, what kind of conditions are they faced with, I guess, in relation to the kind of relationships that they have with maybe their most intimate partner? What do they tell you?
Well, what we're hearing there is, and particularly in Lusikisiki, was that they have very high levels of fear amongst women. Women fear for their lives. They fear, this lack of safety in the communities because there's such high levels of violence amongst the males in the community. So those are some of the issues that are very difficult to work with. And we're trying to work with the women, and older women and younger women have different problems in the area, and then also working with the men and boys. Difficult conditions, that are leading to this. In some of it, the women talk about, when they create safety nets by looking after each other, that does help. But they told us the stories where people knock on the door and, when you come out, you're grabbed, and raped. And so they try not to do that anymore. But it's like I say, it's a multi-pronged, very challenging issue in Lusikisiki that has to be addressed. But unless even the interpersonal relationships are shaped by deprivation and shaped by a lack of employment and so forth, and that causes frustration and anger amongst the youth. I'm not making excuses for it, but I'm really showing that, we can't just say, let's do awareness campaigns, let's march, let's light candles. None of those things change the attitudes and behaviors. And what we're trying to do is to get the norms and standards changed at the community level. Some of the chiefs are very supportive of the work that's been done. They've created safe spaces. There's a lot of work being done in Lusikisiki by different agents, and we must recognize that. But the problem is a long-term problem. We are not going to change attitudes and behaviors by a few workshops or, awareness-raising campaigns. We have to go in and do really deep work. I was at the Institute of Healing of Memories the other day, and they spoke about the need for this really deep work at an individual and family and community level, where, you are able to change attitudes and behaviors by asking the right questions, by getting people to reflect on their lives and reflect on the violence within their lives. So most of the communities in Lusiki are facing structural violence, all of them, that's men and women. And that structural violence translates into interpersonal violence. And that, of course, leads to the rapes and so forth. So definitely the lack of resources, lack of access, the inequality are all the drivers. And those are long-term problems. And, the minister says the police must up their game. I'll say it again, it's not just a policing issue, it's a whole of society issue. Police come in when a crime has been committed. We don't want the crimes, we don't want the rapes, we don't want the femicides. And that is where we have to focus our attention.
Ms. Foster, you speak of changing norms and standards and this deep work that needs to be done. And I guess there's also different levels to that, right? So while you are working with the adults, I do fear for the young boys that are growing up in many of our communities in the country. So when you talk about long-term solutions as well, to catch them while they're young, to orientate them differently, I guess, if you will, to stave off this trend of the abuse and the violations. So what kind of conversations are we having, or what kind of work is being done at that level of catching the boys while they're young?
Yes. Well, this has been Child Abuse Week, and there's been an intense focus on children. What the minister hasn't said very clearly is that a lot of the rapes of children that we are seeing is rapes of boys. And boys by boys. And we don't have a strong enough strategy to actually support those children. Then, in terms of the work with youngsters, we have to start at preschool level to start working on changing norms and attitudes. It's too late when we get to primary school and high school. So definitely the work there needs to happen at a very early age. And there we work with boys and with girls to change their attitudes and behaviors. But remember, those children go home. They go into, family units where they may be witnessing violence all the time. So when we talk about a whole of society approach, we mean that every segment of society has to readjust the way they think and the way they behave towards women and girls. The status of women and girls in our society is extremely low. Women's bodies are commodified and women's lives are expendable. Women and girl children. That has to change, and it has to be all of us taking responsibility for that. What I'm excited about is that the whole country is doing work on gender-based violence in small bits around the world. When I went to the Healing of Memories Institute, their whole program with youth now is on gender-based violence, and I was inspired by that. I think we need to take heart that there is work happening and it will change eventually, but it is not a quick fix. It's not an event. We have to go the long route, and do the hard, deep work in order to see change happening.
Ma'am, thank you very much for your time this morning. Masimanyane, Women's Rights International Executive Director, Ms. Dr. Lesley Ann Foster.